talk to us today?
Oh, hey, good afternoon. My computer is running actually an update at this time. What wonderful timing. And it beeped just as the program would have beeped to let me know that the video started. Hey, glad to be back with you all as we get back into 1 Corinthians chapter 9. We're going to pick up pretty much where we left off last week with the idea of giving up to be free to give up one's freedom. And with that, let's go ahead and begin in prayer. Blessed Lord, you have caused the Holy Scriptures to be written for our learning. Grant that we may so hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that by the patience and comfort of your Holy Spirit, we may ever hold fast to the blessed hope of everlasting life. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, so Paul has been discussing a few issues within the church, and one of the things that he's been tackling is the idea of why can't I do something? And one of the things that he's going to be putting forth is that in Christ we are actually free to give up that freedom, or to not make use of it. That might be a better way of putting it. So he's making some illustrations here in regards to that, in particular with his apostolic office, where he has certain things that he can rightly expect from the people. They are part of, say, the compensation for the workers of the gospel, which has been established through the law and by custom, that those who have dedicated their lives to the proclamation of the gospel can, to expect something to, make it so that they can live, payment. And he's, but I forewent that. And he's also done things like taking a godly wife along with him and things of that nature. And so I forewent that. And he's going to go, and we're going to get to this point where he's going to be making the point that he actually did it for a reason. And so we're going to get into that as soon as I kick us over to the our slideshow. And it helps if I get to the right window here. Screen share. Yes, I love how I can screen share Google Hangouts. So you can look at me looking at you. Oh, what a wonderful world. Okay, so screen share. Make sure everybody's getting to see it. And okay, there we go. So, okay, I gotta turn it on. Helps if I turn on my pen here, so we can, get all those nice little red marks all over the page. Oh, come on. This is probably going to be a very fun day, since my computer has decided today is a good day to update its security software. And it took a lot longer than I thought. All right. So here we are, 1 Corinthians 9:19. Paul's going, okay, I'm free to have these things and free to expect them, but I'm also free to forgo these things. And then he's going to further illustrate it. And let's just read how he does this. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. And to those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, and that I might win those outside of the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. So, Paul goes, I have this freedom, but there's other things I need to take into account before utilizing this freedom. So even though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all. Honestly, I think servant here really is just kind of too weak of a word. I know this has a lot to do with American sensibilities or Western sensibilities rather than actual reflection of the Greek. When they're talking servant, they pretty much mean slave. Okay, so he's making a very strong statement here where, yes, I'm free from all, but I made myself into a slave. So he's really foregoing freedoms. And this isn't just kind of, oh, I'm gonna, maybe help out a little bit. No, he's pretty much going all in. And so I think we kind of lose some of that idea when we, weaken the language because, well, we've got this gut reaction against the word slave. Not that I'm saying our gut reaction is completely unwarranted. I mean, let's face it, our cultural history and baggage because of slavery in the antebellum South is, well, enough to give anybody the heebie-jeebies when it comes to the word slave. But I think we also do ourselves a disservice by letting those heebie-jeebies keep us from, translating the text as it is. And we kind of lose some of its punch when we do this. We want to maintain that punch, I think, because, well, we kind of need to be punched. And let's face it, some of us sometimes we just need to have that, the strength of the economy come out. So he's going, okay, I'm free from all, but I've made myself a slave to all, that I might win more of them. So there's a whole point here. Why this is happening. Essentially, he's going, for the sake of the gospel, I've made myself a slave. So this is going to have some import here as we go along. We can't say that his being a slave to all is just because, well, they're weak and so I got to be a slave to them. No, it's for the sake of the gospel. He wants to make sure the gospel predominates. And so he's going to make adjustments to his own life to make sure that the gospel shines, okay? So, I just had one of those brain farts. It's like, did I actually finish reading this? Let's break this down into the groups that he's covering. To the Jews. Honestly, this is kind of self-explanatory. His practice was to go first to the Jewish people. And so these are the people who are Jews. These are the physical descendants of Abraham who were believers believers. So he's going to the Jewish people. Now, I probably should clarify a little bit. The Bible doesn't always use the word Jew in the same way. I want to. I have in mind, in particular, John. John, in his gospel, does have the habit of using the word Jew to refer to those who have actually stood against Christ. Now he is taking into account, that they're of the descent of Abraham. They are Judeans, so to speak, members of the tribe of Judah. That's actually where the word Jew comes from. It's kind of a mispronunciation, or not a mispronunciation. It was when it was incorporated into the Babylonian language and Aramaic and whatnot. It kind of got warped. Judean was warped into Jew. I'm not exactly 100% certain how that happens. Language experts probably could tell you a lot better, more than I can. In fact, they really can. They're language experts for a reason. I'm not, because I don't have that skill set. Whatever. Anyhow, so. This word does have Jews does have a couple different meanings in this case. Paul is referring simply to those who are believers and descendants of Abraham. And so his first practice was to actually go to the Jewish people in a region. And he would go and he would go to the synagogue and he would talk in the synagogue. And things of that nature. Okay, and the next group, those under the law. Likely this refers to the numerous Gentile God-fearers who would also be attending the synagogue. Now, many of these, prior to hearing the gospel of Jesus, would have willingly submitted to many aspects of the Jewish law. So there's every reason for us to understand that these are Gentiles who were circumcised. They were observing the various dietary laws. Some of them probably even made the journey to Jerusalem to observe festivals. And so those under the law would refer to those who willingly submitted themselves to many aspects of the Jewish law, which would include the ceremonial in addition to the moral law. So that is who he's referring to. He's not really referring to legalist, which is what I've seen people say elsewhere. No, he's referring to these Gentile God-fearers. Which brings into what does he mean by Gentile converts now? These would be people who actually have heard the gospel but never submitted to the Jewish law. And so these are Christians who did not. So they weren't like these were the Christians, but didn't have things like they weren't circumcised. They didn't observe the dietary laws. I mean, they may have been observing the whole don't eat blood, that kind of thing, in accordance with the apostolic decree that came out of the Council of Jerusalem. Pardon me, allergies have started kicking in.
They've been Gentiles?
Yeah, these were Gentiles. So these would be Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, whoever just happened to be in the region. So they weren't of Jewish descent, but they still were believers. I think we could probably put it maybe along the Ethiopian and Acts would be the wrong one. Titus would be a good example here. Titus, you may recognize the name from one of the books of the Bible. Titus, he was a Gentile convert. In fact, Paul was under pressure to have him circumcised and such because, well, he wasn't. He was a Gentile convert. And so Titus would be a kind of a prime example of that. Okay, moving on to the next category. We have weak. With the idea of weak, we've got two really strong possibilities here. In fact, I'm not even going to say they're mutually exclusive. So we can, I think, safely understand them as both informing the meaning of weak. So we would have those who are vulnerable to peer pressure and those who are weak in economic status. So, poor, slaves, that kind of thing. So, and we can understand this because we've got some stuff from like his letter to the Romans, where he talks about they should be associating with the lowly, the people that we would consider the dregs of society. I know we've interpreted that to mean sinners. Those don't always go hand in hand. I mean, they're godly poor. Just as there's sinful poor, just as there's godly rich and sinful rich. Okay. But those who he would see low in status. So he's going, don't go around hobnobbing with the doctors and the lawyers while ignoring the plumbers in your midst. Or in their case, don't go hobnobbing with the wealthy merchants and then ignore this poor slave who's also in your context. We'll see this kind of pop up here in the 11th chapter too. So that's one of the reasons why we're going to say, yes, this is informing the weak. And also, we can't ignore the whole vulnerable to peer pressure, because we just already had a little bit of a discussion, of being mindful of those people who are going to see you do something and interpret, oh, that must mean it's completely okay. But it's not okay. So we're going to take in both of these contexts. And so he brings these up. He goes, okay, so I'm going to be a Jew to the Jews. And to those who are under the law, I'm going to be under the law. And for the Gentile converts, I'm going to be as they are. And I'm going to, and to the weak, I'm going to be weak. Now, some people go, well, this can be dishonesty. No, what he is going, he's, I've got these things. I'm not going to deny that I have these things. I'm not going to deny that I have this freedom. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to throw it in their face. So if he's hanging out with Jews who are going to have all the Jewish hang-ups, or at least likely going to, I should say, they're likely going to have them. I'm sure there were many Jews who, when they heard Peter's proclamation about being set free from the dietary rules, were more than happy to go out and have a BLT. But there's also going to be the other person who's going to be going, bacon bad, because bacon is ham, pork, and bacon comes from pork, and pork is bad. I can't eat that. There would be a crisis of conscience for him. And so he would go, okay, if I'm going to go hang out with the Jewish people, if I invite them over to my house, this is kind of the idea he's getting across. If I invite my Jewish friends over, I'm not going to put pork out. Kind of a simple thing. I'm free to eat pork, but I'm not going to eat it because it's going to hurt them. Similarly to the God-fears, in some ways, these two are going to go a little bit together because, well, they share that common bond with the Jewish law here. And so with these folks, he's not going to go, well, you're wrong to have been circumcised because, well, this is what you were given, and so don't worry about it. You have these festivals. Keep observing the festivals; that they're fine, and those kind of things. And probably, in fact, he probably would observe like the Day of Atonement with them, or any of those kinds of things. In fact, we know that he would do some of that kind of stuff because when he went back to Jerusalem at one point, he actually went to the temple to do his temple duties. and also to proclaim things. So, so we know he would give up some his freedom in these cases. And with the Gentile converts, he wouldn't come into them and lord over them that they hadn't gotten circumcised. In fact, he would defend them from the circumcision party. He would also be aware of some of whatever hangups they might have. And to be honest, I'm not going to get too much into those because it's hard to put a nail on those ones, because you never know what baggage they would be bringing in. Probably the one we could say for certain was a likely one would be the whole discussion we were having earlier with the pagan idols. They might have, they would very likely have some issues with that, and so he wouldn't in this case he wouldn't be eating meat served to idols because he'd realize that might cause them some hang-ups. And the same with the weak. He wouldn't. He would make sure that he would spend time with them so that they wouldn't feel left out and have thrown at their face that they weren't the high and mighty. And he would also be aware of what things were going to tempt people so that they wouldn't tempt them. So he's going, we got great freedom, but our freedom can also be a stumbling block for people. So we need to be aware of how that's going to affect people. A great example of this from our own history is back when the Reformation was happening. One of the things that was being addressed was the abuse of the sacrament at the altar, where the laity was only given the host. And Luther and his fellow reformers came along and said, well, Jesus actually said to take, eat, and to take drink. Paul reiterated that, and so we can't withhold it from the laity, because then we would be making them guilty of disregarding Christ's words, and we would be leading them to abuse the sacrament. The problem that they encountered is that the laity had been brought up for so long under the Roman system, where that they were only allowed to have those, that they thought it would be absolute blasphemy for them to receive Christ's blood and to drink from the cup. And two camps arose, and I'm drawing a blank on Luther's friend who went the one way, and yeah, this is where having problems with names really comes into an issue. But he insisted that everybody has to take and drink the cup. Luther is going to come along and say, no. Otherwise, we'd be no different than the Romans who abused the sacrament, and also those who came along and said that the converts had to be circumcised. Luther goes, if you got somebody who just really, really cannot bring themselves to drink the cup because they think it's blasphemy, don't force them. We take a more patient approach, where we allow them to continue receiving the host, but at the same time, we work on them to come to understand that, yes, they ought to be taking the cup. So, for their sake, don't force them. Give them time. It's very similar to what Paul's going here. We are free to receive this. In fact, we should be receiving it because it's how Christ instituted it. But we also need to be aware of what they consider to be a sin. And they've been taught that this was a sin. And so rather than cause them undue grief, we just take the time to correct the error. And we don't do it by beating them over the head. We do the hard work of laying the foundation so that they can see that in it, it's not that they're going to sin, but will actually receive forgiveness for their sins. And so this is something we take into account, and it really does have some wide implications. So, and I've touched on them a little bit before, so I'm not going to touch it again. Now, one of the things I wanted to make clear is Paul brings up this law of Christ. What is he talking about? He's referring back to this law of sacrificial love that Christ institutes with the apostles, to love one another as Christ has loved them. And so he says we are bound by this particular law. And so in this case, it means that we would take on the burdens of others, which, is kind of contrary to some of the things that we hear today, where I can't count the number of memes that I've seen on Facebook about, getting rid of the problem people around you, to not, to your hang-ups, your hang-ups, don't bother me with them, that kind of stuff. Paul is actually kind of saying the opposite. Their hang-ups become your hang-ups, because there's something more important. Now, I know I'm going to hear, but, we're human. We can only take on so much, and I'm going to say you're absolutely right. There is a limit to what we can take. And it is good to have some boundaries. I'm sure Paul would tell us to have some boundaries, but he would also say there's something more important than our own well-being, actually, and that is the gospel. And so we may have to take things on that just aren't healthy for us. Now, as he's saying this, he's also saying that, we take on the burdens of others, but we do not act immorally. So the law of Christ still falls within the wider bounds of morality. So I was going to draw something, but I decided against it. I'm not sure I can draw it right. And so this isn't forsaking moral law. So, he's not saying to witness to the strippers, he bears the burdens of being a stripper. Well, one of the burdens of being a stripper is, stripping. He's not saying go do that, because that would be wrong. But he and I bring that up only because I've actually heard people use it this way. So, but he is saying, we do sacrifice ourselves for the benefit of others. He's sacrificed his freedom for the benefit of others. Which brings us to the next passage, 24 through 27. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we are an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. Okay, all this has everything to do with the gospel. He's reinforcing his primary goal is the gospel. That's it right there. Everything is for the sake of that. I know I've seen people talking about that in terms of personal gain, and I know we've within the Lutheran Church have used this to go, yeah, it's good to practice these things, bodily fasting and such, and that is used, but we can't forget this part. It's for the sake of the gospel. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, Paul is bringing to mind a set of games called the Isthmian games. And they're kind of like the local version of the Olympics. So you had all these track and field events, and they would occur every 2 years. Lockwood thinks that it's likely the entrants were expected to do things similar to the Olympics, where they would have to devote 10 months to strict training, and they'd have to give these oaths and do all these things where they need to give up certain bad habits and certain things that we would consider to be otherwise fine. Think Rocky. If you've ever seen the movie Rocky, and what was the coach's name? Here I go again, forgetting the name. Where anyhow, Rocky's told he has to do all these things, including foregoing women and such. And that's kind of, if you keep that montage in mind, and some of the things that the coach was demanding of Rocky, that's kind of the idea that Paul is behind the whole Olympic training that may be involved in these games. And so Paul probably is entirely likely to have witnessed these things, or at least heard of them. And so he's reminding them, this is the kind of dedication we're looking at. That we're looking at the long haul, and we're looking at winning the race. And the race is the saving of people. And that's really what he's talking about when he's going, but we are an imperishable. The prize is people being set free in the gospel. What we're talking here is salvation. We want people to be restored in Jesus. So we're going to train ourselves, and by what he means by training is we're going to forego freedoms that we would otherwise be able to enjoy, because those freedoms are going to be stumbling blocks for others, and they're going to hurt people. And so we don't want to hurt people. We want to be, loving to people, and so we're going to remove these things that would otherwise hurt them, but we would consider to be good. And so we're going to stop. And we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep training ourselves so that we don't disqualify ourselves by leading people to hell. It's basically what we say. And so we stay within the moral law, and we take on things that would otherwise not be taken on for the sake of the gospel. And he's going to continue this into the next chapter, but he's going to take it from a different point of view. And we'll get into that next week. If you got questions, don't hesitate to ask them. Don't forget to, all the wonderful things YouTubers tell you, like, subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. And I will see you next week. Blessings, everybody, and have a good week.